What happened in 1962 at Ole Miss was a war between the state of Mississippi and the United States of America.
James Meredith, the supplanter of segregation in the Civil Rights Movement. From 1954 to 1968, the Civil Rights Movement opened up new opportunities for African Americans and was a beacon of hope for people of all colors and creeds. Activists such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X battled segregation and discrimination by implementing boycotts, leading marches, delivering powerful speeches, and defying Jim Crow laws to claim their constitutional right of equality for all. James Meredith, African-American civil rights activist, writer, and political advisor, fought for justice both by serving overseas in the United States Air Force and by standing up to tyranny at home. Unlike King, Parks, and Malcolm X, Meredith did not receive the same attention for his brave actions. Despite his many efforts, Meredith did not consider himself a hero.
I am not a civil rights hero. I am a warrior, and I am on a mission from God.
Through his persistence and determination, Meredith completed 2 missions, making the state of Mississippi recognize his right to attend the University of Mississippi and encouraging African Americans to vote by leading the Walk Against Fear.
My objective in this war was total victory. Victory over discrimination, oppression, the unequal application of the law, and most of all, over white supremacy.
He endured persecution and derogatory insults, but he persisted and worked tirelessly to successfully overturn the segregation and stereotypes which had relegated blacks to second-class citizenship in Mississippi. James Meredith was born in 1933 on an 84-acre cotton farm in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. The name James means supplanter, a person who purposely acquires power by overthrowing something. It was as if Meredith was destined to overthrow the segregationist systems of Mississippi. Growing up, he lived in an 11-room house with his parents and 12 siblings. While the house lacked a toilet, bath, or running water, it was the first piece of land a Meredith had ever owned, and it was considerably better than the homes of other African American Mississippians. The house and land provided security and pride. Cap, James's father, taught his children that death was to be preferred to indignity, and that the most dishonorable thing a Meredith could do was work in a white woman's kitchen and take care of a white man's child. Before leaving Mississippi in 1950, James Meredith had never been inside a white person's house due to the fact he would have to enter through the back door.
Ever since I was 15 years old, I have been consciously aware that I am a Negro. But until I was 15, I did not know that my group was supposed to be the inferior one. Since then, I have felt a personal responsibility to change the status of my group.
In 1947, Meredith enrolled in the segregated Atala County Training School in Mississippi. In his senior year, he continued to experience segregation when he transferred to Gibbs High School in St. Petersburg, Florida. Directly after graduating, he joined the Air Force. In 1954, when Meredith was in his 3rd year of service, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of Brown in the case Brown v. Board of Education. By 1957, the first schools had begun to integrate African American students into their student body. After serving a total of 9 years in the U.S. Air Force, Meredith returned home to his father in a critical state of health and the next chapter of his life awaiting him. To begin, he enrolled his wife and himself in the all-black Jackson State College. His next chapter was Ole Miss. In January of 1961, Meredith applied to take courses at an all-white school, University of Mississippi, commonly known as Ole Miss. He was rejected. He reapplied later that year. He was rejected again. Determined, Meredith took legal actions. He filed a complaint to the U.S. District Court stating he was only denied admittance to the University of Mississippi because he was African American. He reached out to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and he requested assistance from the federal government. The court rejected his complaint, but when he appealed, the Fifth Judicial Circuit Court decided to support him, and they declared the school's admittance policy was inherently unequal. In Meredith's letter to the judicial court, he wrote,
I simply ask that the federal agencies use the power and prestige of their positions to ensure the full rights of citizenship for our people.
With resistance from staff and students still an imminent threat for Meredith, the federal government decided that Meredith was to be escorted to class by federal marshals.
Well, now here's my problem, Governor. Listen, I didn't put him in the university, but on the other hand, under the Constitution, I have to carry out the orders of carry that order out. I don't want to do it in any way that causes difficulty to you or to anyone else, but I've got to do it. Now, I'd like to get your help in doing that.
Riots broke out the minute Meredith was on campus. Rocks, offensive names, and hostile remarks were thrown at him by a large congregation of white students.
Before the rioting ended, scores were injured and some very critically. At least one man was dead. Police said that Paul Gerard, a French reporter, had a puncture wound in his back. The whole thing started out like a circus sideshow with about 175 federal marshals as the center attraction. The crowd of curious onlookers displayed signs saying, "Yankee go home," and Confederate flags.
When President Kennedy sent 5,000 troops to Mississippi to restore peace, the case made national news, and to many African Americans was a symbol of support in the fight for civil rights. Letters were being sent to Meredith from all over the nation.
As a white person, I am deeply grateful to you for what you have done to persist out the folly and inhumanity of my race. May God bless you and forgive us.
On October 1st, 1962, after a long battle, Meredith became the first African American student to attend the University of Mississippi, and he opened up new opportunities for future African Americans. While he attended Ole Miss, he was escorted to his classes and was still opposed by many students. He graduated from Ole Miss in 1964. He had left his mark on Ole Miss. His next mission was battling the fear of the voting polls. While African Americans had the right to vote, many of them feared they would get hurt when they registered. To help combat this underlying fear, Meredith organized the March Against Fear. On June 6, 1966, Meredith and his followers started their 220-mile trek from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. Meredith carried only a Bible and a walking stick. On the second day of the march, 2 miles south of Hernando, Mississippi, Meredith met his intended assassin.
"James," said the man, "I only want James Meredith." Then he came right out and shouted, "Meredith, I only want James Meredith. All the rest of you, stand aside." His was the white face the Southern black man had been staring at through 350 years of history. The hard eyes, the fleshy face, the hard line of mouth, the supremely confident, homicidal arrogance of the beast of white supremacy.
The man opened fire. Meredith was hit in the head, neck, back, and leg. He was taken to the hospital where he stayed until June 25th, the last day of the march. As Meredith was not able to continue, Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights organizations picked up where he left off. And when the march arrived in Jackson, there were more than 15,000 marching. Because of Meredith's heroic acts back in 1962, when he fought for the integration of Ole Miss, 13.3% of the current student population at Ole Miss are African American descent, and more than 20 different courses are offered on African American culture studies. The current Ole Miss mantra is now, the presence of a diverse mix of students, faculty, and staff with their individual intellectual perspectives and contributions enriches the university community. James Meredith's resolute actions to combat the persecution of his race led to the integration of the University of Mississippi and may have influenced other schools across the United States to increase the diversity amongst their students. His persistence in what he believed in greatly impacted the desegregation movement. Although James Meredith's efforts are not widely recognized, his actions tell the story of a remarkably heroic struggle to end discrimination in the United States.
The two names most connected besides James Meredith to the Meredith March Against Fear as it is known. Stokely Carmichael, you think of Black Power. Martin Luther King, you think of I Have a Dream. My wish, when people think of James Meredith, they think of good and right.